if anything about that picture gives you a hint of what we're about to talk about, Joseph Stalin pointing to what the sort of slogan says, the pyramids of Russia. This is, of course, the human skulls or the victims of something called
the Purges. I'm Mr. Raine.
Mr. Suter.
Welcome to the lesson on Stalin and the Purges.
So, Stalin, Russia by 1929. Last lesson, as I'm sure you remember, Stalin has manipulated, bullied, controlled, forced his way into power by removing his key serious political contenders for control. Trotsky's gone down, Kamenev, Zinoviev have gone, Bukharin is gone. He has pretty much got rid of the top guys. But, as we shall see, his control over the country and the party as a whole is far from complete. He might have got rid of the other guys, the rivals, but he hasn't got control over everyone else. It's very easy for a new rival to come up out of nowhere. He now needs to get control over the party and the country. This is a particular case because he wants to change Russian society very quickly and a lot. He wants to completely change how agriculture works and how industry works. And to do this, this is going to anger and upset many, many people. And if he is not strong, if he does not have complete control over the people, then he is going to lose all authority and maybe even be kicked out of government. So, with all these very strong elements of society, he needs to systematically, step by step, destroy every possible group who could oppose him, so that by the end, as we will see, of 1939, he has complete control over Russia. These groups who could possibly oppose him, the old Bolsheviks, the Bolsheviks under Lenin, who still hold a lot of weight. They are although he's got rid of some of them, they still have a lot of friends in high places. They've got the moral case as well. You should listen to us, not Stalin, because we were the true Bolsheviks in this area, The senior members of the party, again, they could rally opposition against him. Although Stalin controls appointments and makes sure people have jobs, there's nothing to stop them suddenly ganging up against him and firing him. Remember that Stalin is not a dictator at this point. He's still only general secretary. He's only got 2 actual reliable votes in the Politburo. If you remember from the last lesson, the Politburo is the organization of the top 20 or so top communists who vote, and whoever the majority wins. Stalin only has control of 2 of these, and if the rest of the other 18 of them vote against him, Stalin can be kicked out. And again, similarly, the junior members of the party, the ones who do the listening, they could also threaten him by stopping to support Stalin, supporting someone else. The masses could always revolt and rise up against Stalin. The army with the guns could do what happened in 1917 and refuse to defend or even attack Stalin and get him out of power. And again, the secret police.
Okay, so let's deal with the secret police. Something that's pretty common in Russian history, and something that's sort of common when you have an organization that's generally detested or hated by the people, is you rename it.
Yeah.
You put a fresh coat of paint on that thing and hope that people don't notice. And the Cheka was detested. We learned over past lessons just the type of brutality the Cheka did, how they kept order during the Civil War, how they enforced war communism, how they basically killed anybody who went against them. Stalin realized that the Cheka was hated, so he puts a new coat of paint on them and calls them the OGPU. He'll, in fact, pollute that name so effectively that by 1934, he will have to rename the OGPU the NKVD. This is, in every way, shape, and form, exactly the same thing as the Cheka was.
It's the same people.
They are the secret police.
Same building.
They use a combination of informers, they use spying, and they make sure that there are absolutely no threats to the Communist Party, and most importantly, no threats to Stalin's power or his life personally. They'll use arrest, interrogation, torture, prisons, gulags, and execution to instill a deep-seated fear in the Russian people that they should do whatever Stalin says. And what we have from between 1929 and all the way through the 1930s is a period that becomes known as the Purges. The word to purge means to expel, to get rid of. And the Purges worked in various ways.
They weren't just killing. They were a vast range of tactics designed to intimidate people into doing what they're told, and often depended on the threat and position of those arrested, rather than arresting everyone. Everyone was very scared by the purges. Even if you weren't arrested, you did what you were told from then on, so you didn't get arrested. But the various tactics, as already mentioned, include arrests, interrogations, brutal interrogations, torture, jail, the gulags being these work camps we mentioned last time up in the North Siberian wastelands where life was hard and many people died, show trials, which we're going to talk about in due course, and of course executions. And it's very important to mention throughout this whole thing, when we talk about the purges, the tactics they use differ. When they turn the purges on everyone, you can't realistically shoot everyone. So it turns much more arrest, interrogations, torture, and jail. When it comes to the army, who are a big threat, they shoot them all, because that's quite a big threat. But there are a range of tactics depending on who you are. All the senior communists, for example, are too much of a threat and they're all killed. The junior communists might just lose their jobs after going to jail. And as part of the purges, we have a network of informers who are used to find counter-revolutionaries. However, if you're going to rely on people to denounce, snitch, if you will, on other people who are anti-Bolshevik, very often you just use this to settle your personal grudges. Say, oh, I don't like this person, they've said something bad about me, I'm going to tell the OGPU, the NKVD, the Cheka, wherever they happen to be at that particular point, that this guy is anti-Stalin and supports Trotsky. Alternatively, if you want to look innocent, there's nothing better to make yourself look innocent by reporting on someone else, even if the person you're reporting on hasn't done anything. And we see a lot of people accusing and sending letters to the NKVD and OGPU saying that this person has been supporting Trotsky, or this person is supporting Kamenev. You should arrest them in order to look innocent. What this does, and what the purges do more than anything, apart from killing people who could threaten him, is create a climate of fear and conforming to what Stalin wants over time, which by the end of 1938 means that Stalin has complete control over Russia.
So we're going to take a look at a number of the key purges, almost in chronological order through Russian history, or through this history of Stalin's leadership. The first one we'll look at is a man named Ryutin. Now, Ryutin was an old Bolshevik. He was around since the days of the October Revolution. He knew Lenin well. He was liked by Lenin. He actually idolized Lenin. He was not in favor of Stalin becoming general secretary or leader of the Communist Party. He, in fact, goes and makes a key mistake in 1932 and says that Stalin is the evil genius of the Russian Revolution. Well, Stalin didn't probably like the idea that he was the genius of the Russian Revolution, but didn't necessarily like the tag on the evil genius. And as such, Stalin had Ryutin expelled from the Communist Party and he was exiled. Anybody associated with Ryutin, anybody who worked for him, or anybody who was friends with him, otherwise unreliable people who were around Ryutin, 22% in totality will find themselves mostly executed.
Yep, and so Ryutin's friend would find himself executed. Stalin also used this as an opportunity to get rid of members in areas which don't necessarily support him, particularly Moscow and Leningrad. And a lot of members, 22% of the entire Communist Party, were expelled. They weren't killed, they weren't arrested, they were kicked out the party. And they just happened to be in areas where they don't necessarily support Stalin, because historically they were led by Kamenev or Zinoviev or Trotsky. So Stalin uses this Ryutin thing as an excuse to get rid of potential enemies. But if you notice, in 1932, this is relatively mild. Ryutin hasn't been executed, for example. Stalin wants him to be executed, but the rest of the Politburo vote against it and say, no, let's just kick him out. This is the story of the purges, escalates as time goes on. We came on to the murder of Kirov in 1934, which is a turning point. Now, Kirov is an increasingly powerful member of the Communist Party. In the 17th Party Congress, if you remember, the Congress is where the Communist parties join up and they discuss policy. He said that there should be an increase in workers' ration and less forcible grain requisitions, taking grain away from the peasants This gets a lot of support, and this is deliberately designed to make people go, you know what, that Kirov guy, he's a good guy. This attracts a lot of applause, and Stalin is very obvious and very aware that by Kirov saying it's Stalin himself who reduced workers' rations and Stalin himself who did grain requisitions. What Kirov is essentially saying is, you know what we should do, Stalin? We should do the opposite of what you're doing. In fact, Kirov's supporters even managed to get Kirov and Stalin given the same job title. They get rid of the old general secretary and call both of them secretary of equal rank. For Stalin, and this is an evidence of quite how weak Stalin is in 1934, the Politburo vote for this, and there's nothing Stalin can do. This is terrifying for Stalin. It looks like Kirov is taking over, or at least rivaling him for power. By pure coincidence, on the 1st of December 1934, in dubious circumstances, Kirov is assassinated. Essentially, there was a disgruntled member of the Communist Party who felt like he hadn't got what he had been due, and who hides out in an area which suspiciously no one should really have access to, and jumps out the toilet and shoots Kirov in the neck. Suspiciously, there are no NKVD guards, which they'd normally be inside.
No, they went home for the evening.
They went home for it. And also the only witness, suspiciously, on the way to give evidence about what happened when escorted by the NKVD, there is a inverted commas car crash where the car actually turns out to be fine. No one in the NKVD side ranks are wounded, but unfortunately for this Borisov, this bodyguard, he's brutally killed. He dies brutally in this inverted commas car crash with his head is caved in. Interestingly then, the NKVD guards who were with him suddenly all also die and disappear. This is looking murkier and murkier as time goes on. But what it is used for is Stalin suddenly goes, oh, poor Kirov, I love that guy. He's amazing. We need to hunt these clear traitors who are plotting against the Communist Party. And it's used to unleash massive amounts of arrests and really kickstarts the purges as we commonly imagine them.
Well, I hope you can read the cynicism between Mr. Suter's lines, and also you can probably read the cynicism in the lines I'm about to read. Unsurprisingly, it was determined that Trotsky was behind the murder of Kirov, and as a result, Russia needed to be purged to remove the threat against key leaders of the Communist Party, including Stalin, and in response to Kirov.
And the key thing is there's the idea that hidden in the Communist Party in Russia are these Trotskyist scum hiding ready to take over at any particular point.
Who would murder such people as Kirov. This leads to a widespread number of arrests. 40,000 people in Leningrad alone are arrested in response to the death of Kirov. 500,000 members, including senior members of the party, are expelled out of suspicion of their loyalty.
It's interesting that Leningrad is Kirov's home base. A lot of loyal people in Leningrad to Kirov. And also, if you look at the types of members expelled, they're very rarely Stalin supporters. They're people who had previously supported other people or just from generally unreliable background. These arrests take an even more sinister turn in 1935 and 1936. We find Zinoviev and Kamenev were arrested in 1935. That's meant to say for 1935, not by 1936, on the excuse of hunting for Trotskyists. We also see in 1935 the 17th Party Congress. Remember that? The thing that Kirov spoke at, who applauded how brilliant Kirov was when he said that actually Stalin had made a mistake, essentially. Over half, 1,108 members of the 17th Party Congress out of 1,966 were arrested. Most disappear. 98 out of 139 members of the Central Committee. The Central Committee is the second highest, most important part of the Communist Party, below the Politburo. Also find themselves arrested as Trotskyists, hidden Trotskyists. Interestingly, again, the people who find themselves arrested are the ones that Stalin has any doubts about. Sure, coincidence, they were never his supporters.
Yeah.
Party branches were told to inform on suspected Trotskyists.
Yeah, I suppose I was just going to go back to your last point. And, the fact that these people disappear, Russia's a big country. They could just have been lost, right?
Yeah, absolutely right.
They may come back home.
You never know. And many of these, not all of these are killed. Many are put in the gulag. But particularly the higher up and the more senior you go, the more likely you are to be killed. Stalin cannot trust sites of opposition. People who are angry are one thing. People who are angry and have power to organize other people are dangerous. What this is doing systematically is by telling every local party branch, from Siberia to some random town in the back of Port Arthur on the coast of the Pacific, is saying by saying you need to find these Trotskyists, is that they are getting rid of anyone who thinks independently, anyone, even if they didn't support anyone else, they still support Stalin. If you're someone who might think independently, a bit too educated perhaps, a bit too have your own ideas, you are got rid of. That gets rid of anyone who independently thinks, and you learn very quickly the way to survive and actually get promoted, because these people lose jobs, there's new jobs available, is by just doing what you're told and not thinking. It also creates this position, this climate of fear. If you want to, you are terrified at any point you can be arrested. What's the only way you stop yourself being arrested? You prove your loyalty by doing everything and more that are asked of you.
Now, of course, Stalin, people know what's going on. They start to realize it. But Stalin needs to legitimize the purges that are beginning or have begun in great numbers. And what he comes up with next is something known as show trials. These are basically court proceedings. These court proceedings are filmed, they're broadcast on radio across the Soviet Union, and the show trials most notably feature the key leading members of the Communist parties. And poor old Zinoviev and poor old Kamenev find themselves up for trial in 1936. The judges at these show trials knew exactly what the sentences would be. Their decisions were already made, and in many ways made for them. Behind the scenes, Zinoviev and Kamenev are brutally tortured by the NKVD. They're forced to confess, along with being told that their confessions would be that their families would be spared, that they would be effectively saving their families' lives. Most of them, including Kamenev and Zinoviev, because of the significance of the torture and because of the threats on their family, admit to all manner of made-up charges. These show trials are used to legitimize the purges and further stoke a climate of fear. And in the end, Kamenev and Zinoviev are killed.
I think it's really important here, by having on record, in their own voice, recorded, Zinoviev and Kamenev say, yes, there is a Trotskyist threat, yes, we were trying to take over, yes, we've done all these terrible things. It makes Stalin look less paranoid. It makes Stalin, people go, you know what, actually there may be people in there. Even if you don't believe it, you are beginning to suspect it at least. And this is used as an excuse to further widen the terror. So if you think about that list I told you at the beginning, of all the different groups who could possibly threaten Stalin's control of the part of the country, the old Bolsheviks are now show trialed and dead. The senior members of the party are largely fired, executed, or put in a gulag. The junior members of the party have mostly been fired, a couple killed, but mostly fired, and are now out of position. He now begins to turn on the masses, and he decides he's going to widen the terror to affect more people. So, first thing he does is replace the NKVD head Yagoda, who is always a little bit reasonable, with someone called Yezhov. Yezhov is a man who truth and reality doesn't matter. His job is to find Trotskyists. He's going to find as many as possible. He's a proper lapdog in the sense that if Stalin says jump, he will jump higher than Stalin could dream to impress him.
Should mention that Yagoda was murdered because he knew too much.
Absolutely, and this is a pattern what happens to anyone who works for the NKVD, as we shall see in due course. So Stalin makes clear that there's a conspiracy at all levels of the party and society. And people and villages and towns are encouraged to denounce their workplace, friends, people in the village, people in a local town, people in your building. If you denounce them, then A, you prove your own loyalty. How can you be suspected of being a Trotskyist if you found a Trotskyist and reported on them? That doesn't always save you, but it's at least something. Or if you don't like this person, you don't like your boss, you don't like this person on your shift, you don't like the person in the village, you do it to say, you know what, I don't like you, get yourself arrested. Yezhov doesn't help this situation by deliberately targeting artists, managers and professionals, people who are educated, people who can organize dissent, people who think for themselves. Draws up the list of arrests, and most of these are sent to the gulag and removed from society. As well as this, and we're going to sort of take a pause here, there is something called the snowball effect. The NKVD, Yezhov was told to find loads and loads of traitors. He tells each NKVD office, one in Siberia, one in Moscow, one in Leningrad, you have to find me 20, let's say randomly, 25,000 Trotskyists. They're not there. There aren't any Trotskyists, just for clear. But you have a quota, you've got to find 25,000. If you're the party boss of, if you're the NKVD head in Leningrad, and you found your 25,000, yeah, you've done your quota. And then you hear that Moscow has found 35,000. Who are you worried that Yezhov might think is more loyal? more, we'll get the next promotion, but also maybe we'll be certain that he's certainly not a hidden Trotskyist. So what you do if you're Leningrad, you get 45,000. What does Moscow do? Moscow gets 55,000. And what happens is there's this snowball effect as there's a competition between different NKVD officers, different NKVD managers to find the most amount of traitors to both impress Yezhov and to demonstrate that they are the most loyal. How could they possibly be Trotskyists if they've caught the most amount of Trotskyists in the entire country? And this is what is called sometimes Yezhov mania, or obviously for the fact that Yezhov has started this off. What we tend to find is many of those arrested are arrested between the hours of 11 and 3. In fact, Nighthawks are sort of the name of these NKVD who knock on the door and pull you out and arrest you. There's many Russian jokes. Russian humour is obviously in this period renowned for being a little bit dry, where one goes, for example, a man opens the door, there's a knock at the door, and he opens it gingerly. He turns to his family and says, "Don't worry, it's only our building that's on fire." Meaning that, of course, that's better than having a knock on the door for the NKVD. Hilarious, as I'm sure. Thank you, sir. But be aware that not everyone who is denounced is shot. The vast majority find themselves in labour camps. The general rule was, if you got denounced and you were interrogated, unless you did a fantastic job or you were lucky, you'd go to a gulag for 10 years. Hard labour 10 years in Siberia. Stalin put a quota that 28%, specifically 28, not 27, not 29, 28 had to be shot. And broadly this happened. There's a little bit extra here, a little bit under here. And what this does, what all of this does is make Russians scared. They are scared that they could be denounced. Interestingly, because the show trials have sort of made it look like there is a Trotskyist threat, people don't start hating Stalin. They fear Stalin and they hate Yezhov, but they want to show their loyalty, because the only way you can try and prove on one of these interrogations is if you have denounced those people, you are work very hard, you have never complained, and you're very loyal. It makes people unwilling, for example, to gossip about the government. You would never criticize the government in public. That's the first way someone's going to overhear or someone's going to denounce you. You are, "I love Comrade Stalin and he is amazing." And if anyone says otherwise, you report them, and then you will get a gold treat. Well, not a gold treat, i.e. not being shot in the face.
Basically, you get North Korean levels of outward loyalty.
Absolutely. In reality, North Korea is not even as strict and as this area came from now. We see an expansion of the terror further in 1937.
So leaving the masses and sort of purging them, he then turns on the army. It's really one of the last major groups that could threaten Stalin. One of the heroes of the Civil War, a man named Tukhachevsky, is killed along with 3/5 of the marshals and 11 of the war commissars. Almost all of the top level of the Soviet army is completely purged. All of the admirals, all but one of the Air Force commanders, 35,000 officers are imprisoned or shot. This has, this of course affirms the loyalty of the army, but it also has dramatic consequences for the USSR in World War II. One of the interesting side notes of all of this is that when the Nazis invade in 1941, the Russian army is almost leaderless, and the Nazis trained generals, some of the best leaders of warfare of the 20th century, roll into Russia, and they're facing generals who have been leaders for a very short period of time because the real brains behind the Russian army had been shot by Stalin.
Absolutely right, and I think it's really key to point out that the threat the army posed was they were the ones with the guns. After this, the head almost, the brain of the army was taken off. Yes, they were weaker, but in Stalin's mind that's better because at least they are now loyal and he is secure in their loyalty. There's one group left. We have got the party. We have got the masses, we've got the army. Of course, it's the NKVD themselves. There is poor old puppy dog Yezhov on the right, and he is no longer. Of course, Yezhov is now an NKVD, but also a threat to Stalin. They know where their bodies are buried, literally and metaphorically. And also, they are a group who have access to guns who could possibly kill Stalin, so he needs to purge them as well. And how does he purge them? He basically makes them a scapegoat for everything that's happened. He writes in Pravda in 1938 an article called Dizzy with Success. Dizzy with success is what it sounds like. We have succeeded, but we got a bit crazy towards the end. We got a bit dizzy. Essentially saying that, yes, there were loads and loads of Trotskyist counter-revolutionaries, But Yezhov and the NKVD, that insidious man, had gone too far. And a lot of people who had felt like innocents had been caught, some look at this and go, yeah, damn Yezhov. I'm glad that Stalin had dealt with those Trotskyists, but Yezhov. And what does he do? Stalin do? Well, of course, don't worry, guys. I'm going to shoot Yezhov for you, to widespread acclaim, and replaces it with a guy called Bera, who is a little bit more easygoing. And the top 20, most of the top of the NKVD, including 23,000 members of the NKVD, are shot. What he's essentially doing is he's used the NKVD for their purposes now, and now he's purging them as well.
And burying the evidence.
And burying all the evidence of any blame. Everyone who replaces either are unaware of what happened or know very, very wisely not to say a word about what they do know. What this does is this destroys the last possible group who could oppose Stalin, who have any power in the Republic, and also in the Union, and also gives him someone to blame for the excesses. Everyone believed there was some degree of Trotskyist threat, but they knew that their aunt who had been taken to a gulag wasn't guilty. But now it's Yezhov's fault. It's not Stalin's fault. And this is very important. We'll talk more next lesson about the cult of Stalin. That certainly helps people to think, you know what, Stalin couldn't possibly do this. And that's definitely part of it. But this 1938 massacre, you've got to feel sorry. I mean, obviously he's a butcher and he's a horrible man, but like he was so eagerly trying to please Stalin, and Stalin turns around and shoots him in the face. So,
what are the effects of the purges? And this is very important. The examiners love to ask you about this stuff. So here's number one. Creates a climate of fear, obedience, outward loyalty to Stalin that would last until his death. Russians do what he says the entire time. No questions asked all the time. Number two, he never challenged from within or with outside of the party. Really, everybody who could challenge him is dead, but as a result, he gets the result that Stalin is the unquestioned leader of the Soviet Union. Number three, he helps ensure industrialization, his industrial work project and his catching up of the Russian economy, and his collectivization, his agricultural reforms for farmland, which were happening at the same time, worked, and that people worked very, very hard to ensure Stalin's lofty goals were met. Number four, in many ways, I suppose, in a negative sense, the USSR is weakened internally as a result of the loss of so many skilled experts in every aspect in government administration.
If you were educated or independent thinking, or you were someone in a position who knows how to influence, you are a threat to Stalin. You are got rid of. Stalin would prefer an idiot in the post of army, head of the factory in the university, than someone who is loyal.
Yeah, and this really puts Russia in the back foot, and most notably in the Second World War, when the Nazis invade, and all of the sort of the skill set that was murdered in the purges is needed in every aspect of Russian society. And lastly, throughout all of this, Stalin was at pains to make the whole thing look legitimate. And
he wasn't a cackling evil genius going, "You're all going to die." He was desperate, with first the murder of Kirov to give cover, then the show trials, and then blaming Yezhov for the whole thing. He desperate for the whole thing to go, "Guys, there is a Trotskyist threat. We need to do this." I almost like a concerned dad. I really don't want to do this, but I have to.
And it's a lot worse than grounding you for the weekend. Anyhow, that's all we have to say about the purges. Look forward to talking to you next time. I'm Mr. Raine.
And Mr. Suter.
See you again.